Welcome back, everyone, to RoomPack's ResEdChat podcast. Every episode, we feature a variety of different topics of interest to hired professionals who work in and with university housing, residential life, residential education, whatever you might call it. But we have an interesting one today. I know I'm always sort of like brainstorming new and different interesting things to explore in kind of the wider world of residence life with our kind of fearless leader for the podcast, Paul Gordon Brown. So he's, well connected, there's a lot of amazing, interesting folks. So he's often kind of sourcing them for me to talk to. And I think this topic is one where I feel like I'll learn a lot, talking about ACUHO-I standards and sort of implementing them into practice, and just sort of a perspective on that. We'll kind of just try to cover it briefly here, and certainly encourage folks to kind of continue the conversation and explore it more deeply beyond just sort of the bounds of this episode. But we'll start as we always do. Jeanette, if you want to kind of introduce yourself briefly, kind of your background, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I'm the Director of Housing and Residence Life at Eastern Michigan University. I've been in this role for 9 years. We're a regional institution in Southeast Michigan, and we house about 3,000 students, and we have about 14,000 students who attend Eastern Michigan.
You've been in that position for a while. I guess just to contextualize for folks too, like how long have you been like in residence life, or just kind of higher education at large, however you kind of want to capture it? Because I know we're coming at this, I think, with a sort of very kind of 30,000 feet view, I guess, sort of, building sort of your background and sort of your perspective on this work.
So I have actually been in the field for 27 years, and always in housing. I love student affairs, but always in housing and residence life because I just love the intensity of the work. And previous to here, I worked at SUNY Buffalo, University at Buffalo, for 17 years, and got my master's at Indiana and got a PhD here at Eastern Michigan University.
So a lot of different institutions, and just a lot of commitment to this this work that we're going to be talking about today. And I wanted to make sure that I gave kind of a kudos and congratulations to you finishing your doctorate. And if you just want to talk about like what you worked on and just sort of any brief reflections on the experience, because it's a major life milestone. It's pretty awesome.
Well, and I just got it in December 2023, so I was very excited. I did my research on Black men living on campus at predominantly white institutions and their sense of belonging, and things that impacted their sense of belonging, what inhibited their sense of belonging. And so that was an amazing experience. I think it taught me, just my reflections, two things. One is that I think I always turn to literature and research to give me answers, and those are very important things. But I think listening to students and hearing individual stories has also become, I think, a part of what I want to do for the rest of my career, because an individual story can be so impactful, and it may be counter to what research is telling us in the moment, because sometimes there's also that lag. The other thing, because I studied belonging, that I'm cautious about is sometimes we use the word sense of belonging as a catchphrase, like, oh, we create sense of belonging. And I don't think we've really always gotten into defining what that means for us, presenting to students appropriately. I met a lot of students who said, I don't know if that resonates with me. I don't know what that word means. And so to see it on a t-shirt, to see it on posters, I'm starting to become more critical of it. I think it exists. I think it's an important part of a student experience. I just want us to be really intentional about using it. My little lesson for the day.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's one of those sort of like it's one of those like zeitgeisty things where it's just like, it could be everything or anything to people, and oftentimes I could sort of fall flat or be kind of shallow or hollow, kind of whatever you'd want to call it. But because I think, and I guess it's sort of a brief follow up to the like that idea. I think that I've heard people sort of challenge the concept of belonging as the sort of like end all be all kind of outcome, is that like it can end up having people sort of like assimilate versus like who I am. I find my unique identity and I feel as though I am safe and, welcome in this space, being my unique self, versus everyone kind of assimilating to one, kind of bland, like, kind of just normal, and I'm using air quotes here, kind of version of yourself. So is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, yes. And interestingly enough, I think we don't talk about safety enough. And this concept of safety, particularly for Black men, came up a lot. And so that's a sign of that do Black men feel safe in the world, let alone on our college campuses? Maybe, maybe not. And so their belonging is tightly coupled with a feeling of being safe. Like, I'm not going to be, um, victimized, or I'm not going to be criminalized on this campus. So there's a lot to it, but indeed, I think we have to dig into it and recognize that it looks different for different students. And it doesn't need to look a certain way. It doesn't need to look like Jeanette Zalba's sense of belonging. Um, so I just want us to be intentional for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's a very good insight there, and I think it definitely connects. I think to your other point of that idea of like, we can get now where I feel like we're so washed in like research and data and this and that, like kind of lost in kind of the sort of law of averages or whatever. Like this idea that like, well, the average this person does this, the average, and it's like sure, but then there's a lot of people that don't do that or whatever. So it's like you can get so preoccupied with those sort of like those notions if you can get sort of personal narratives and we've explored on the podcast here, I'm sure also related to your research around like masculinity or whatever, like you get sort of these average research survey statistics that say like, well, the average Black man does this or that the other, or the average female student does this that the other, like, and if you can start to, and I would say at least like complement those with the personal stories and all that, definitely another good bit of advice and kind of insight there. But certainly encourage folks if they're interested. I mean, just connect with you or find that work that you did. Yeah, it's there for the finding. And our topic for today, talking about ACUHO-I standards. So again, you've kind of been in this field doing the work in housing and residence life and residential experiences and everything for a long time. Can you discuss your experience with like ACUHO-I generally and like the standards specifically?
When I started in the field of housing, someone introduced me to ACUHO, which is the National Housing Organization, actually international housing organization that supports people in this field. And I started going to conferences, kind of started looking at a lot of their foundational documents, and found them as really my professional organizational home. Um, and I think I have a very strong interest in assessment. And so someone introduced me once again to the standards. I don't think it's something you land on, like you forget that we have standards. You might not realize we have written professional standards guiding our work, but I was introduced to it, attended something called the Professional Standards Institute, which is unfortunately no longer at this time. Kind of COVID might have impacted that event. But I attended, I learned a lot about it, and really started to see the standards as a great lens for me to look at the work, use it in a variety of ways. And that was, boy, even that, I don't even, that was probably 20 years ago. And then at some point, I was asked to become faculty for the Institute. And so I spent 3 years teaching other people about the standards and how to use the standards in their work. So that was a really great experience.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that reminds me of, we've talked about this on the podcast as well, is like, vision statements and mission statements and all these sort of things that like, departments and institutions have that can like end up feeling kind of static or sort of irrelevant or just sort of like, they're up on a wall or kind of gathering dust on a shelf, and trying to find those ways to make them feel more vibrant and dynamic and relevant and sort of active, and that sort of thing. So even that idea that like people maybe like, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I know they have standards, but like some of them feel more or less relevant, or I remember looking at them but not in a while. So like I think yeah, it's good that like you were finding those opportunities to try to yeah, really engage with them more deeply and everything. So I think you know the goal of this episode, hopefully inspiring folks to find ways to find kind of opportunities to make these standards more sort of applicable into their sort of operations and their teams and everything. So we're going to start here and maybe just kind of clarify a couple follow-up questions, but like, how do you see these standards being able to sort of like inform practice or be more sort of like again sort of like dynamically applied into your fellow colleagues work?
Well, one of the things I'll say is the more and more I meet colleagues who have been in the field, we sort of grown up in the field. I mean, a lot of people started as resident advisors, or they lived on campus, and so they have stayed in housing. And in fact, I think housing people kind of like that. But the problem is sometimes you get a little tunneled and you sort of follow the same model you grew up under. You're trying to recreate something that happened in the past. I love my RA experience, so I'm going to make that same experience for my current RAs, meaning resident advisors. And so I think what the standards will help us do is kind of step outside of ourselves. Do I think a lot of this work is intuitive? I actually do. I laugh because my own job description says I need a PhD to do it. And I was like, you don't like, you need to be really thoughtful and an intentional practitioner and do some reading. But these standards kind of allow us to step outside of what we think is good work and provide a base for what nationally, internationally, other practitioners are saying makes for good work, makes for the best practice. Um, and so I think the best implementation is to really think about where do you want your department to be if you work in housing residence life. If you supervise housing residence life, you're a vice president for student affairs. Are you looking to improve or change your department or validate the work you're doing? The standards might be a place to turn. And really all of the ACUHO foundational documents, I think, can help you do that. Whether it be evaluating your own program or just thinking about, are we doing what I think we should be doing outside of my own opinion? I want to say 8 years ago when I started here, 9 years ago, it's the first thing we did. I pulled out those standards and introduced them to my team and said, are we doing these things? Let's just get a baseline. I'm not worried if we're doing everything perfectly. I just want to know, like, are we hitting some markers that will be help us think about where we want to be, where we could be. Are we doing all the things we should be doing? The other thing the standards help us do, to me, in my opinion, is to leverage with our own stakeholders on our own campus. So sometimes you have a resource you need. Sometimes you're trying to get buy-in for a certain project. And one of my good friends says, you're never a prophet in your own land, right? So nobody ever, we really need this. Come on. But maybe if you could pull those standards out and say, hey, the International Housing Organization says we need to do XYZ. That can help, that leveraging that idea, getting that buy-in. So I think just introducing it to your staff, using it in evaluation, using it as a tool to kind of step outside of yourself for best practice are the first things I'd say to help implement. Like, pull this thing out. And by the way, I was just on the ACUHO site and it's there. You don't have to be a member to see it. So anyone can pull that document up and look at it and review it and introduce it to their staff.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I mean, you're just gonna mention a good couple of different applications, like because I know for me, a really big one, like kind of on a organizational development front, is the idea of like when you're evaluating kind of like the performance of team members, it's like, well, we want to make sure that you're achieving, working towards these different standards in your kind of day to day work, and certainly, like you mentioned, just kind of like high level to kind of level set where we are, where we want to get to. Those can be like the helpful benchmarks, and then yeah, just for like trying to advocate for resources, like, hey, we're really not measuring up to where we should be, and getting those resources. Like it's so many different facets, but all sort of equally important in their own ways. And um, in my mind, I was like, yeah, and I think it could uh, add to like credibility. And then it's like, well, I mean, students don't really know what these are, so like it's not going to be like a credibility there, but like even just sort of like you're saying, like validating it to your colleagues at your own institution, and then even like if you're trying to like recruit, you could really show like, hey, well, this is what our team is doing aligned with these standards and where we'd like to go and all that. Like if somebody wants to come work, at a particular institution, I'm sure like, I really hope so, like that would really resonate to see like, hey, we're kind of really integrating these and kind of showing our work and yeah, like making it very clear that these are important standards that we hold ourselves to, versus like kind of that idea that like, yeah, everybody probably be like, yeah, okay, yeah, these standards are important. It's like just sort of lip service, but like showing like here at our institution, like, and really making it very explicitly clear.
Well, and I joke, I mean, I say, like, you don't need a PhD to do this work because you don't. Um, and I don't want to be flippant that this is a profession. And sometimes we have to convince our other stakeholders on our campus that We are doing work intentionally. We are doing work with an academic lens. We don't just make stuff up. Occasionally we do. Um, but, I know during COVID, we were asked to do a lot of things, and I had to remind people of what we're not doing. And so I think all these foundational documents help us say we are a profession, we are trained, we follow professional standards, and we deserve respect. Now, I feel very fortunate that we do get respect on my campus, and so, but it is because of we present those things. We're not just making it up. But do I think with a lot of experience, like I said, reading, paying attention to what's happening nationally, internationally, um, people do sometimes make things up, sure, but it comes vetted. It comes with experience for me.
That's always like my perspective though, is that, like, if you're well read, if you sort of like are really um kind of smart about it, it's the idea, it's like, yeah, we don't have to all be like standards robots, but like if it's all sort of blending together to inform your perspective, it's like, yeah, I think especially people in, housing residence life are probably good improvisers, in the sense of like, you've got to like think on your toes and respond to what's happening, at your campus with that particular student and like, whatever else. But like knowing that it is sort of informed with everything sort of blended together of like whatever training and education you have and knowing the standards and everything. But then it's like, especially when you're kind of like writing things down or have that opportunity to be sort of trying to kind of showcase yourself in the best light and kind of advocate for things, it's like it should feel very uh, easy or like kind of a important requirement to bring these in, because it just sort of gives respect to the really the power of what folks on campuses in these departments are doing, because yeah, without it, it's like, yeah, it would just feel a little bit more fragile, like people could kind of poke holes in it. It's like, well, what are you basing all this on? It's just like, well, again, yeah, that idea, like, well, everything is like, improvised, but trust me, I'm well trained and all that. So I think, yeah, it's something that I feel like is happening a little bit more, uh as just like higher ed is sort of in this period of like transition and change and all that, is like trying to find these sort of like bedrock sort of foundational things we can sort of hold on to as sort of standards in a time when like, you know I would say certainly in housing residence life, it's like, we're seeing campuses become more digitally transformed and hybrid and all that. So like, how do we like make sure that, uh, we don't lose sight, I guess, of sort of like what we know are sort of these high impact practices and the outcomes that are able to be achieved through, residential experience. Well, with all of that, I think we've talked about why this is important and some examples of how to do it. What advice would you give to leaders looking to integrate them?
Well, I think first go get yourself a copy. Um, and I did just hear from ACUHO that there's a self-assessment guide, which is a complimentary document, which is not currently on the ACUHO website, but will be. And that is actually a really, I want to say simple, but maybe that's not the best way to explain it. But they take all of the standards, which are done in bullet points. So the nice thing is when you read this document, it's a pretty quick read. So, I would say get the document, get the self assessment guide. I'm being told they'll be put up shortly, and start looking at that document and introducing it to your team. I would also say there's two parts of the document that I think could be integrated right away. There's an ethics section and an ethical hiring practices section. Those to me are, you could implement them right away. You could bring them to your team and say, "Hey, I want us to do this. Let's review this. Let's make sure we're already doing this." Relatively easy. They could be used as is. You could copy them and put them. Sorry, copyright. I don't know. But they could be used in your manuals as best practices when we talk about ethics and hiring. So don't recreate the wheel. Go grab something, borrow something from this organization who's taken the time. Back to these self-assessment guides, though, is uh, they cover every piece of the standards, but I also think sometimes people get overwhelmed. They get overwhelmed by assessment. They're going to see the document and say, wow, this is a lot. Maybe you just take one section. You could take residential facilities, student learning and development as a section, and just do that self assessment for that one section, and really think about, are we doing these things? The other addition I'll say with that is don't do it alone. So do it with your team, do it with stakeholders, because they're the ones who are really going to, be honest and truthful, but also they're the ones who are going to make that change and get the buy-in if you want the team to make a change. So you could, as a director or as an assistant director, associate director, fill out the self-assessment guide yourself. Oh, this is what we did. We're compliant here. We're not compliant there. But really make it a team experience, not a gotcha experience, but instead sort of an improvement experience to review with the team and say, hey, are we doing these things? I'm going to ask the residence life side of the house to look at this section this summer. And those self-assessment guides, once they come out, are really easy to use. They actually just take each item, each bullet, and you just score them. Are we partially compliant, fully compliant? And then it gives you some reflection time to say, well, what do we want to do about this? Since they're all guidelines, even ACUHO doesn't say you have to follow every single thing, but maybe there's one thing that you say, wow, this really illuminates something we want to work on. But just read it, share it with your staff, do the self-assessment guides, use those ethical pieces. It's actually a very easy, accessible document, I think.
Yeah, it's good resources and advice there. Because I think, yeah, it's just like that kind of little nudge, and I think you just build some momentum with this, and seeing how it could be helpful. In I would think people are imagining exactly what you're saying. It's like, well, I don't want to feel like it's like a gotcha kind of thing, or that I'm sort of like, creating delinquency around, whatever, or creating a culture where we feel like we're kind of getting I don't know, kind of like that idea of like you do that assessment, and if you're like, oh my gosh, like look how much room we have to, sort of like these gaps we have to close or whatever. But it's like, you know, one person's challenge is another person's opportunity, I think, and like having this sort of structure to know sort of like, you know, uh, how you can kind of keep kind of having sort of continuous improvement, sort of iterate on things. Like it's just like you're not sort of resting on your laurels or just sort of making assumptions about, what you're doing and how you're doing it, and all that. So I think, yeah, this is I think a shorter episode. Like we could probably talk about this for a very long time, but I wanted to kind of give this sort of brief episode and acknowledgement of hopefully having folks kind of rethink as they're heading into like a new academic year, how they can kind of start kind of reassessing the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis with their team. Um, so definitely link out to what you'd mentioned in the show notes so folks can go check it out. And hopefully folks will also reach out to kind of keep the conversation going with you. And we'll do that in the description for the episode. But thanks so much for hanging out and kind of just giving a brief little window into how to better integrate ACUHO-I standards in the work. And yeah, maybe we'll have you back some point in the future to kind of do like, because I feel like this is the 101 episode. We'll do 201 some point in the future to kind of keep this going. So I think it's always a important and timely conversation to have.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin, for having it.